and welcome everybody. My name is Stephen Lynch. I don't consider myself to be that smart, but I just ask lots of annoying questions that make people think, and hopefully the questions in this workshop will get you thinking today as well. Now, hopefully you've all downloaded the workbook, but at the very least, if you don't have the workbook, make sure that you've got something to write on today, because I'll be running through a series of exercises to help you and your leadership team to make wise strategic choices about how to navigate these challenging times. And really, to get the most value out of the workshop today, you really want to have all of your key decision makers together with you in the same room. But I appreciate with the COVID lockdowns, this is now impossible for many leadership teams. So there are going to be a number of breakout sessions today. I'm going to ask you some questions and I'm going to have you document your answers. So what I recommend you do, if you're not all in the same room, is to write down your personal answers to each of the questions, and then book a time to meet with your leadership team as soon as possible so that you can discuss your individual answers and get aligned as a leadership team. I also have my colleague with me today, Simon Mundell. He's the founder and director of Advisory Works. He'll be monitoring the questions channel and the chat channel during the breakout sessions today. And at the end of the webinar, we'll both be available for a question and answer session. And as Debbie said, Simon, he's built a close relationship with the ASB over the last 20 years, and he's going to be speaking with you toward the end of the webinar to tell you about the next steps, because this webinar is part of a series, and later on Simon will speak to you about a value-added offer courtesy of the ASB to support your business. But I am going to hand over the mic just briefly to Simon Mundell now, just to briefly introduce himself before we get underway.
Thanks, Stephen. And there we go, that's me. Okay, so today's really about what's in the way and can we get it out of the way? Because no doubt all of us have got something in the way right now. The world has changed. It's going to continue to be changing for some time yet. And we don't really know what's going to be happening. We've got some predictions, of course, but responding to different scenarios that are coming at you is going to be quite crucial for your future success. But also, while we've got challenges right now, it's the biggest opportunity of your entrepreneurial career. There is, so much opportunity out there. There's opportunity to gain new talent. There's opportunity to potentially acquire other businesses, grow your business in many other ways. So we're looking at both sides of the equation. So today is really about getting stuff out of the way. How do you identify what's coming? How do you deal with that? And then on the 17th, we're going to discuss what's your plan? Because if you've got a clear plan for next year and beyond, and your competitors don't, chances are you'll be the winner. So I look forward to talking to you a bit more about that later on. Thanks.
Thank you, Simon. So let's get underway. What is scenario planning? Well, it's the practice of creating alternative courses of action to implement based on potential events and situations. And this workshop today, it's designed to give you an overview of the scenario planning process. Now, to be fair, the time we have available today, it's really not long enough to do it justice, but you'll at least have the bones of a framework that you can build on later. So let's get underway. They called it the Miracle on the Hudson. Now, New York City, 2009, a US Airways flight struck a flock of geese and lost power in both engines. And they only had 3 minutes of airtime remaining. And the first thing the flight crew did was they got out their checklist for this exact scenario, which is loss of thrust in both engines. And the pilot, Captain Sully Sullenberger, he was able to take the right actions and ditch the plane safely in the Hudson River with no loss of life. And as you may know, the story was later made into a movie starring Tom Hanks. Now, in high stress situations, having a scenario plan to follow, it stops us from panicking and it guides us to take the right actions. And this is what we call having a plan for the worst case scenario. Now, the plan didn't give the pilots all the answers. They still had to make a judgment call, like they chose to land in the water when they realized they couldn't reach an airport. But the scenario plan, it gave them step-by-step guidance on the right actions to take. So in simple terms, that's the scenario planning formula. It's if this, then that. If this trigger event happens, then take that action. That's what scenario planning is. Now, you can also build a plan for a best case scenario, like a sudden increase in sales demand that really stretches your company's ability to deliver. And this has been the case for one of my clients, like Whoop. Now, they deliver home meal kits, and they've had to plan how to rapidly scale up their capacity to meet increased customer demand during the COVID lockdowns. They needed more food, more staff, more production space, more health and safety requirements. So they had to create a scenario plan for what to do if any of their staff test positive for COVID as well. General Eisenhower, he said plans are useless, but planning is indispensable. Now, he commanded the Allied forces in Europe during World War II, and he later served as two-term president of the United States. And he was responsible for overseeing the invasion of Europe in World War II. Now, as you can probably imagine, in war, things do not go exactly how you plan them. And for the D-Day landings at Normandy, the Allies had no way of knowing what the weather would be like or what the beaches would be like or how the German defenses would respond. So they had to plan for many different scenarios to increase their odds of success. But there's another military maxim: no plan survives first contact with the enemy. So no scenario plan will survive first contact with the reality of the marketplace either. So whether you're a military leader or a business leader, you need to continually update your scenario plans based on changes in your environment. And we'll talk about how frequently you should update your plans a little bit later in this workshop. You've probably seen the Eisenhower matrix. Now, President Eisenhower, he made sure that he only spent his valuable time on important and urgent matters. Now, 3 decades later, this concept was popularized by Stephen Covey in his best-selling book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Planning, that sits in the top right-hand quadrant. It's important, but it's not urgent. But wise leaders, they schedule time to plan, just as you're doing today, and they schedule time to update their plans as well at a regular cadence, and they do that no matter how busy they are. Now, my client Whoop, the meal kit company I mentioned earlier, they're busier than they've ever been, but the CEO, Thomas, and his leadership team, they still take a full day out of their business every quarter to review and update their strategic plan with me. And they schedule a 2-hour meeting with me every month to review and update their strategic progress. You see, planning, it's not urgent, but it is important, and you need to schedule it regularly. So what are the benefits of scenario planning? I'll let you have a look through this slide. So scenario planning, it forces us to get our heads out of business as usual. It forces us to think about the future. It helps us to identify and deal with threats, but also helps us to identify and seize opportunities. We choose when to act and how to act. And scenario planning, it'll give you more confidence as a leader. Now, you can't predict the future, you can't plan all the details, but what you can do is have the confidence of knowing what direction you need to move in and what actions you need to take. You're not panicking, you're thoughtful, and you are prepared. So here is the 6-step scenario planning process we're going to use in this workshop today. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you examples for how to do each step to give you and your leadership team some guidance. And to be fair, you won't be able to do the process justice in the time you have available, but you will have a framework. And if you want to do a more comprehensive job of scenario planning, you'll have the opportunity later on to book time with one of our advisory works team to facilitate this process with your leadership team one-on-one. So step 1 is to clarify the issue. So what I want you to do is to choose the focus for your scenario planning today. Now, for many of you, that focus is going to be the COVID pandemic and related consequences like supply chains and travel, health and safety. But as you can see, there are other issues that also benefit from scenario planning. So what issue are you going to focus on today for the purposes of this workshop? I'm going to give you all 1 minute of silence just to discuss with your team and identify the issue you're going to focus on today for your scenario planning. So 1 minute just to quickly choose the issue you're going to focus on today. I'll give you another 10 seconds. Okay. Now, some of you might be asking, what is an industry inflection point? This is Andy Grove. He was the founder of Intel, and he was the guy Steve Jobs used to go to for personal advice. And in his book, Only the Paranoid Survive, Andy Grove, he talked about dealing with inflection points. An inflection point, that's where a significant change is occurring or is about to occur in your industry. And we either make a good strategic decision and we go on to be more successful, or we make a poor decision or no decision at all, and we go into decline or out of business altogether. Now, the COVID pandemic, it's been the catalyst, or it has accelerated the onset of many industry inflection points. And for some of you, you might have to reshape your business model in order to survive, or let alone thrive, particularly when your industry map starts to look very different. And that's why it pays to think ahead and create scenario plans for inflection points as soon as you become aware of them so that you can make the right decisions. Or to use a poker analogy, a card playing analogy, so you can play a good hand no matter what cards you are dealt. Now, we're only going to spend an hour or so today as a quick introduction to the process, but how long should you spend on scenario planning in the real world? I mean, after all, scenario planning, it takes time. You got to get your leadership team together. It costs you money. And planning, it sits in that important but not urgent. It's in the top right-hand quadrant of the Eisenhower matrix. So once you've clarified the issue you're going to do the scenario planning on, you need to ask yourself, what is the penalty for making the wrong decisions here? And your answer to that question will determine how long you should spend on your scenario planning. Now, at one end of the scale, where billions of dollars are at stake, large corporations like the ASB, they might spend months doing their scenario planning. Now, for our clients at Advisory Works, which are small, medium-sized businesses, we typically offer half-day, full-day facilitations to conduct the scenario planning with them. It really does depend on your issue, and it depends on the penalty for making the wrong decisions. But let's see how far we can get today with the time that we have available. So step 2 is to identify your key uncertainties. And to help you go through this process with me today, I'm going to use a fictional company example. I'm going to use a corporate catering company. Now, this fictional company, they provide food catering for large corporate companies. And the issue they've decided to focus on today is how to deal with the COVID pandemic. So imagine you're the owner of this corporate catering company. What are some of the things that you're likely to feel very uncertain about right now? And what are some of the things that are going to profoundly impact your company over the next 12 months? That's what this exercise is all about. Identifying what are those key uncertainties that you have that are going to influence your company's future prospects. So key uncertainties, they're things external to your business, outside your business. They're things outside your control that could impact the issue you're focusing on today. They're the things that you don't know the answer to. They might be threats, they might be opportunities, could be both. So here is the workshop exercise that we're going to do. And in a minute, I'm going to ask you to list the top 5 to 10 uncertainties that you think could have the most profound impact on your company's prospects over the next 12 months. So start at the high level, at the macro level, drop down to industry level, then down to your individual company level, as you see here on the screen. So for my fictional corporate catering company, here's what I came up with as their key uncertainties. I'll pause to let you have a quick read through the slide. So this is your first breakout exercise today. Now you can start by listing everything, and which is probably what we do in a live facilitation with a client, but we want to narrow it down just to the top 5 to 10. What are the top 5 to 10 uncertainties that could profoundly impact your business over the next 12 months? Start out at the macro level, but don't get too bogged down just worrying about what the government or the economy is doing. Zoom in and think about how does it impact your industry? Then zoom in again and think about how these uncertainties might impact your specific company business model. So phrase the uncertainties in the question format as you see here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a little timer on the screen in a minute, and I'm going to give you 3 minutes to run a really quick mini breakout session for you and your team, just to list as many as you can, but at least the top 5 to 10 external uncertainties that you think could have the most profound impact on your company's prospects over the next 12 months. Now, in a normal workshop, we'd get everyone to do this individually and then would collate the responses and prioritize the top 5 to 10 as a group. You might have to do that after this webinar today. So what you're going to do is write down from your own individual perspective, what are the top 5 to 10 uncertainties from your perspective that could profoundly impact your company over the next 12 months. Now, during these breakout sessions, Simon Mundell, my colleague, he'll be monitoring the Q&A channel, and we can't promise, but where possible, we'll try to respond to any questions you have. But if not, we'll allow plenty of time at the end of the workshop to respond to your questions. So I'm going to give you 3 minutes now to quickly write down what are the top 5 to 10 external uncertainties that could impact your business over the next 12 months. 3 minutes starting now.
While you're thinking about some of the things that could impact your industry over the next 12 months, I was reading an article a couple of days ago looking at some of the issues that are likely to play out. Global supply chain issues are likely to continue for some time. We may have liquidity challenges of some form. Interest rates are going to raise. Economists are predicting a number of consistent predictions. What does that mean for you? What do some of those things mean for you? Okay, 1 more minute. Thirty seconds. Okay, I appreciate it's not enough time to do this exercise justice, but at least you've made a start and you've got a framework that you can build upon after this webinar today. Okay, so you've listed the top 5 to 10 key uncertainties that are going to impact your business or your industry over the next 12 months. So we're up to step 3 now. So we're going to use those uncertainties as the context. And what we're going to do is describe 3 plausible future scenarios. We're going to describe a worst case scenario, a best case scenario, and one in the middle as well. Now, you can create more than 3 scenarios if you want, but that's beyond the scope of today's webinar. But 3 is the recommended minimum. You probably don't want to exceed 5 scenarios. It can get a little bit more complicated then, but the aim at this step is to come up with a narrative or a short story that describes each of your 3 scenarios. So this is going to be the next workshop exercise.
What I'm going to ask you to do is to create 3 scenarios, a worst case scenario, a best case scenario, and one in the middle. But they need to be a plausible combination of external events and outcomes. And we're going to give each scenario a name, and we're going to write a brief narrative or story that describes the state of the world, and we're going to keep it concise. We're going to use 100 words or less. So what does that look like? So here's how my fictional corporate catering company did this. I'll pause to let you have a quick read through the slide. So you should have this format in your workbooks. If not, just create it in whatever you're writing on. So in the first column, we list 3 scenarios, the worst case, best case, and also one in the middle. And I like to give each scenario a name and use a name that's memorable to you, and feel free to have a bit of fun with it as well. But basically, you're creating 3 buckets here. And I called my buckets Armageddon, Hang Tough, and New Dawn, as you can see here on the screen. But it's in the second column. That's where we create our narrative. That's where we create a brief story that describes the state of the world for each of these 3 scenarios. Now, it needs to be a plausible combination of external events and outcomes. Keep it brief, less than 100 words, but make sure you capture the high-level events and outcomes so that your leadership team can clearly visualize what your industry is going to look like if the scenario comes to pass. And if you want, you can also assign a probability percentage to each of these scenarios. And those of you with eagle eyes might have noticed that my probabilities don't add up to 100. And that was intentional. I'm allowing for the fact that something completely unexpected might happen outside of these 3 broad buckets as well. And remember, this is just me creating a fictional example. Don't take anything on the screen as guidance for your scenarios. It's just fiction. You need to do your own thinking. And yep, you probably need to mention COVID, but don't spend your whole time talking about the government and macro level factors. See if you can zoom in and devote most of your narratives to describing the impact on your industry and your company, both the positive impacts and the negative impacts. And yep, some of our client companies, they're doing it really tough right now. And I've tried to reflect that in this fictional example. But on the other hand, we've got many clients who are growing so fast in the current environment that they're struggling to keep up with demand. So whether the sky is falling or whether you can't keep up with demand, it still pays to do scenario planning. Okay, so let's get out your workbooks or whatever you're writing on, and I want you to brainstorm. I want you to start just by describing the worst case scenario from your perspective. Don't worry about the other 2 scenarios just yet. Just focus on the top row. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you 3 minutes to create a narrative that describes the worst case scenario from the perspective of your company. Keep it brief, less than 100 words. I'll let you know when the time's up, but I just want you to focus just on the top row for 3 minutes, and then I'll tell you when to start working on the other rows. And I say during this breakout, Simon will be monitoring the Q&A channel if you have any questions, and we'll do our best to respond to any questions you might have. Okay, so 3 minutes starting now, just to fill out the top row, just the worst case scenario starting now. And for those of you who would like to share anything in the chat in terms of what you've come up with, feel free to do so as well, particularly if you finish early. And I know it's not much fun thinking about the worst case scenario, but we do need to do this. and we do need to have a plan for it, which is what we'll be doing next.
I'll make mention of something at this point, Stephen, which I think is quite relevant for people. We don't like to think about the negative things very often. We try to dismiss them as fast as possible. But in times like this, we need to, and really consider them at some depth. When we do our strategic planning, which I'll talk a bit about soon, later on, sorry, a key element of it is, predicting over the next 3 years and looking at what's going to happen around us that we can't control, but will impact us. Very important right now because the world's in flux, all of ours. So, please, be prepared to look at the danger and don't just shy away from it.
Okay, so that's your 3 minutes there. What I'd like you to do now is to go to the bottom row, the best case scenarios. And what I'll do is I'll give you 3 minutes to describe the best case scenario from the perspective of your company. Again, keep it brief, just focus on the third row, 3 minutes to fill out just the third row. Again, what I've got on the screen, it's just fiction. You need to come up with your own best case scenario.
Interestingly, when black swan events take place like this, market share positions change more dramatically than any other time. And one of the people on our team is a gentleman called Ben Bernstein, a very smart man, co-founder of SeaLegs and Pibius Boat Company, incidentally. We were in our team meeting and I said to Stephen, well, this will certainly qualify as a black swan event. And he goes, no, Simon, it's a whole flock of black swans. I think he was right. So again, this sort of framework allows us to context those, understand what's coming. This is your opportunity to win.
And also see if you can add some metrics and some numbers in terms of quantifying the impact on your business for each of these scenarios, as you can see I've done on the screen. Doing well, everybody. And just to conclude this exercise, let's go to the middle row now, the middle scenario. And I'll give you 3 minutes just to describe the middle case scenario. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to pop them in the Q&A panel. And if any of you finish early, feel free to share some of your ideas or thinking in the chat panel. Okay, 1 minute to go. You should be wrapping up this exercise now and have your 3 scenarios on your workbook. Start wrapping up. Okay, let's move forward. We're up to step 4. We're going to plan your high-level responses to each scenario. So you saw this earlier, if this, then that. We've got our 3 scenarios. Now we need to choose what are our strategic decisions for each scenario. How are we going to respond to each scenario to optimize the outcomes for us in each scenario? Now, I came back to New Zealand last year. I spent the last 12 years living in North America. Now, if you follow the National Football League, the NFL, you'll see the coaches, they'll pull out playbooks like you see here on the screen. You see the coaches, they don't wing it. They don't make up decisions in the heat of the moment. They've already planned for the key scenarios ahead of time. And they will make the play that's going to have the highest probability of succeeding based on each scenario. And that's what we're going to try to do here. We're going to create our own playbooks. Now, I appreciate that sports has clear constraints and clear rules. And in business, we've got far more variables, but the concept is the same. We want to make the play that's going to have the highest probability of succeeding based on each scenario. So this is going to be your next workshop exercise. What you're going to do is to choose your high-level strategic decisions for each scenario, and you're going to describe the impact of these decisions on your business. So again, this is my fictional company example. I'll give you a few seconds just to read through. What I want to emphasize here is that you don't need to get too detailed. We just want bullet points And your task is to create a playbook that's going to predetermine your actions for each scenario. So you just want to list the top 2 or 3 strategic priorities for each scenario. These are the short-term actions that you're going to put into motion as soon as that scenario becomes your new reality. And then in the next column, we describe the impact of these decisions on your business. And what you're doing is you're creating a playbook to have in your back pocket that you can pull out and use if and when the time comes. It's like that pilot, Captain Sully, losing thrust in both engines on his airplane. He could pull out the playbook and know what actions to take. That's what we're going to do here for you. So again, I want you to get out your workbooks and I want you to brainstorm. And I want you to start by creating your strategic playbook for the worst case scenario. Don't worry about the other 2 scenarios yet. We'll just focus on the top row. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give you 3 minutes again to describe your strategic priorities. If that worst case scenario came about, what are your strategic priorities and what impact are these actions going to have on your product, your service, your financials, and your staff? Now, we recently went through this exercise with our own team at Advisory Works, and some of the decisions you might make for the worst case scenario, they might be really painful. They might require some backtracking. They might require some cutbacks, some staff layoffs. It's not fun, but it's not meant to be. The question you need to ask yourself as a business leader is, what is the right action to take here? So once again, I'm going to give you 3 minutes. I'll let you know when your time's up. Just focus on the top row for the first 3 minutes, and then I'll tell you when to start working on the next row. Again, if you have any questions, pop them in the Q&A panel. What are your priorities? What are your actions if the worst case scenario comes about? And what's the impact on your business if you did take those actions? Okay, so the worst case scenario happens. What's the playbook you're going to pull out? What actions you're going to take? What impact it's going to have? Okay, you know the drill now. Now we're going to look at the bright side. We've looked at the dark side. Now let's look on the bright side. Let's go to the bottom row, the best case scenario. And I want you to take 3 minutes to create your strategic playbook for the best case scenario. What actions will you take and what impact will those actions have on your business? Give you 3 minutes. And see if you can add some metrics too. Quantify the impact of these actions. You're probably starting to see how important it would be to have your leadership team together, doing this together as a group with an external facilitator to help corral your team. Okay, you're going great, everybody. You probably didn't realize you're going to be working so hard in this webinar. I will guess, but let's go to the middle row now, the middle scenario. Again, just take 3 minutes to capture your playbook for the middle case scenario. Again, if you've got any questions, pop them in the chat panel, Q&A panel. Feel free to share if you finish early. And for those of you asking, yes, this material will be made available after the webinar. Okay, 1 minute to go roughly. Let's just see if we can start polishing it up now so that we've got our playbook ready to go. 30 seconds. Okay, and let's pause it there. Well done, everyone. I'm working you really hard today. It's not like a normal webinar where I do all the work. I'm actually getting you to do all the work in this case. Now, this is the Advisory Works one-page strategic plan, and in a minute I'm going to ask Simon to say a couple of words about it. But just like our scenario planning, we want to keep our decisions really clear and concise. And yeah, you should be able to fit your plan on one page. And what you want to do is just identify the top 2 or 3 things that you need to do that are going to have the biggest impact. And that's what Simon's going to be covering in the next webinar in the series, about creating a long-term strategy. But here's the thing, less is more when it comes to planning. We need to focus on fewer things in order to achieve more impact. But I'll just hand over to Simon briefly, who's going to speak about the Advisory Works one-page strategic plan.
When you look at this one-page plan, it looks really simple. And ideally, that's what it's meant to look like. The challenge is to get it to that level of simplicity. And that's the hard part. Most plans are produced for maybe getting a facility from the bank, and it's a long-winded document, rather than a very simple view of the absolute things that must be done so that they are actually executable. I would suggest to you that if you cannot get your plan onto a single page, it will not be executable. And execution is where most planning fails. So in the seminar on the 17th, we'll show you how to get your plan literally onto a page so that it's easy to communicate for everybody in your business, because everyone in your business is your business, right? And if they don't know what the plan is, how can they help you achieve it? It's also designed to work together as a team. So your senior team, you get them together. I would recommend that they are there for the next webinar, which is it's going to be very fast-paced, high impact, lots of examples, lots of research, lots of data, lots of little tidbits that you can use. But those who plan the fight don't fight the plan. So when people understand the same context, it's really powerful. So bring some of your team, your senior team, to the next session. And certainly if we do some planning together, it's essential that they are there.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you. And yes, and Simon promises not to make you do as much work as I've made you do today. Okay, you're doing great, everybody. We're at step 5. We've got our 3 scenarios. So we've got a playbook. We've got an action plan for dealing with each scenario. We know what we need to do, but we don't know when we need to do it. And that's going to be the next step. We need to choose when we're going to pull the trigger. When are we going to pull out that playbook and put it into motion? And I'm just going to invite Simon back again briefly. Just before we do identify our trigger points, I want to invite Simon just to explain 2 offers of expert support customized for your business, which are available now courtesy of the ASB.
Well, certainly it's fairly obvious about now that we do a lot of planning. So our business is involved in 2 areas, primarily strategy and execution. In addition to that, we also do a lot of leadership development work, and we have been doing this for 20 years. Planning is, as Stephen said before, it's a not urgent, but incredibly important thing to do, and now is vitally important. I would suggest that everyone that had a plan, that plan is no longer valid. Would you agree? So the world's changed. So you must change with what the changes are around you. So it's a perfect time to come together, and particularly with the end of the calendar year coming up and coming into a new one, to understand what does a strategy look like and how do we deploy this? How do I get my team aligned around that plan? And then how do we execute it? And you'll get all of that through the next part of the process. If there was ever a time to get a plan that you can execute, that your team understand, are engaged and own and deploy, now is the time. So you've got a couple of offers here coming to the workshop on the 17th next week. We will overview that plan. I'm going to give you enough information to DIY it. Worth a few questions probably unanswered for you, but you'll certainly get a good idea of it. If you would like to apply for a full planning session, And when some of these will be made available complimentary courtesy of ASB. That's a deep dive, and we might deep dive the scenario planning or the strategic planning. The strategic planning, we're spending a whole day pulling your business apart and putting it back together. And there's another planning process we might take you through, but we'd talk with you about that. But if there was a time to get a plan, now's it. So I'll hand you back to Stephen, and we'll keep on moving. I'll see you towards the end of the webinar.
Thank you. You should see a poll on the screen. You can select more than one option. We'll leave it up for another 20 seconds. It would be helpful, even if you don't select one of the two options, that you let us know that as well. So I can see most people, looks like pretty much everyone's filled out the poll. Another 10 seconds and then we'll close the poll. Okay, let's close the poll in 5, 4, 3, 2. It's closed. Great stuff. All right, back into it. Now, for you oldies out there, and I'm one of them, you've probably heard this song, The Gambler by Kenny Rogers. And he said, you've got to know when to hold him, know when to fold him, know when to walk away, and know when to run. Now, basically, you need to know what moves to make and when to make those moves, no matter what cards you are dealt. So here's your next workshop exercise. You're going to come up with some objective measures or milestones so that you know when to pull the trigger on each plan. So in this fictional case, I kept it simple. I used trigger points based on the cumulative number of client cancellations this quarter. And I put this together in October. So this is October through to December. And what we do is my fictional company is going to track this metric every week, and we're going to forecast the number of cancellations based on the weekly trend. And if we can see that we're going to get more than 20 cancellations by Christmas, we're going to pull the trigger and we're going to activate that Armageddon scenario playbook, and we're going to activate it before the end of the quarter. We're going to make those drastic cuts. We're going to make those necessary cuts to radically downsize the company if we can see that many cancellations happening. You want to be really specific here. You want to be as specific as you can. And your measures need to be really clear, go or no-go milestones where you're going to make some bold, timely decisions, and you're going to make those decisions with confidence. You can use more than one measure, but they do need to be mutually inclusive, where they both happen simultaneously. So I'm just going to give you 3 minutes just to quickly come up with your objective measures or milestones so that you know when you're going to pull the trigger to activate each plan. So 3 minutes just to document all 3 rows. What are your trigger point milestones that let you know we're going to pull the trigger on this playbook right now? Might be something to do with clients. It might be something to do with revenue. What are the metrics that are going to let you know clearly this is the scenario where we're in, we need to enact this playbook? One more minute. start wrapping up. Okay, once again, you can see that this is not enough time to really do justice to the scenario planning exercise, but at least you know the framework now and you can build upon this framework. Okay, we're up to step 6 to revisit, revise, and repeat. Now, the well-known business philosopher Mike Tyson, he said, everyone's got a plan till they get punched in the mouth. Now, remember, no plan is perfect. You can't know the exact future. You've got to be able to roll with the punches. So yes, we've got our playbooks now, but how well does our playbook deal with the changing reality? For example, how relevant will your playbook be in 1 month's time? How relevant will it be in 3 months' time? Remember, Eisenhower said plans are useless, but planning is indispensable. And Moltke said, no plan survives first contact with the enemy. So your scenario plan, it won't survive first contact with the reality of the marketplace either. So whether you're a military leader or a business leader, you've got to continually update your scenario plans based on changes in your environment. So how frequently should you review your scenario plans? Now, your review sessions, they're going to be much faster. Yes, it might take a half day, full day to come up with a decent scenario plan, but your review sessions are going to be much faster because you're not starting from scratch. You're just modifying your existing document. But you do need to schedule a recurring cadence to check your assumptions and to check that your decisions are still valid in light of what's going on in your environment. So in the case of my fictional catering company, I'd probably schedule a brief meeting every couple of weeks, to be honest. And I'd want to discuss those trigger point milestones, the number of client cancellations, so I can update my forecast of which playbook I'm going to need to pull the trigger on. So this is just your final exercise in terms of your final bit of work. The question you need to ask yourself is, are your assumptions and decisions still valid? And how frequently are you going to need to review and update the scenario plans you've just put together? So what I'll do is I'll give you 30 seconds just to quickly discuss and decide when, as a team, you're going to review the document you've put together today. So come up with a specific date and name one person on your team as accountable for making sure that the review happens, that you pull out your scenario plan, you discuss it, review it, and I'd like you to put that as an appointment in someone's calendar. 30 seconds to do that. Okay, have we decided how frequently we're going to update our plan? And have we named one person as accountable for making sure it happens? And have we stuck it as an appointment in their calendar to ensure that it does? This is Nassim Taleb. He's one of my favorite business authors, and he can come across as a bit arrogant, but I really like him because his insights that they cut through a lot of BS to be honest. And I recommend all of his books, but this one is valid for our topic today. It's called Anti-Fragile, which is about how to deal with disorder. And a lot of us are experiencing major disorder at this time. But by going through a scenario planning process, I hope we can build a robust organization where we can actually bounce back from disorder, where we can bounce back from being stress tested. But even better, if we can build anti-fragile organizations where we actually improve and grow from being stress tested. That is our goal with scenario planning. And a quote from Benjamin Disraeli, he's the former Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, and he was one of the founders of the conservative political movement as we know it today. And in summary, wise leaders, you've got a plan for the worst case scenario, as Simon said. But we do need to hope for the best, and we do need to make plans to capitalize on the best case scenario as well, so that we are prepared either way. We know what actions to take, regardless of what hand we're dealt, so that we can make decisions with confidence. And that concludes the overview of the scenario planning process. But if you, as Simon said, if you don't have a plan, you need a plan. Don't wait till it's too late. A scenario plan, it's just the first step. It's just an interim step. You also need a strategic plan to take these decisions through to a longer time horizon so that you can lead your team through to the future with confidence. Because if you're a business leader, Your number one job as a leader is to paint a picture of the better future you're working toward. And you need to get your people excited about that future. And then you need to provide clarity about here's the path we're going to take. So basically, your job as a leader in a nutshell is to say, here's where we're going, and here's what we need to do next to get there. And if you need help with your business finances to bring your plan to life, please make sure to reach out to your ASB business banking manager as well. And if you need help to create a strategic plan, please reach out to our team at Advisory Work. So we're here to help. I'm going to hand over briefly to my colleague Simon Mundell just to wrap us up for today before we hand it over to Q&A for anyone who likes to stay on and ask us some questions. Simon, over to you.
I want to provide a perspective to consider. We have this component in our brain that's scientifically created and determined. It's actually 3 different parts of the brain that come together to form what's called your reticular activating system. And your reticular activating system is a default. We don't know it's there, but it essentially keeps us out of danger. So it sees things that are important to us. So back in caveman days, it would see the tiger in the long grass. It would see it out of its, you'll see it from your peripheral vision. To give you an example, remember the last time you bought a car and the day you drove it off the car yard, everyone was driving one? That's your reticular activating system. They were always there, you just didn't see them. When you're going through things like the scenario planning and even more so the strategic planning, you're shaping your reticular activating system, bringing into focus that which is important to you, into the business, into the organization. Opportunities that were right in front of you and you did not see, you will now see. And so it's powerful for any individual, any organization to move forward to craft that filter, if you will. The planning is a filter. Planning is only a couple of things. First and foremost, it's the leadership exercise in getting everyone on the same page. Why? Those who plan the fight don't fight the plan. And now we're engaged and aligned as a team. Secondly, it's actually an exercise in resource allocation. You've only got a finite amount of resource. So where do we deploy that resource for the greatest return to get to our vision and our strategic objectives? And then, of course, that shapes our reticular activating system so that we see the opportunities that are in front of us. Organizations that do that in this moment will be well ahead of their peers. So I suggest if you haven't already registered for the 17th, come along, get as many of your team there as you can. You want your team engaged. And the next seminar, Stephen's very methodical and deep, which is fantastic. I will be fast and furious. You'll have to hang on. It's an entertaining session, I'd say, but it's between the two, you've got a lot of detail that you can use, and we'll send you all these resources. So they're yours to use, courtesy of ASB. And we'll also happy to meet with you as well and take you through this, courtesy of ASB.
And basically that's us for today. We're going to stay on for a bit and answer any questions. If anyone has any questions, you could pop them in the chat panel or Q&A panel via text, or if you want to actually verbally ask us a question, that's fine too. Just put your hand up and the hosts will unmute you.
Yeah, so interesting. One of our clients that came to us, it's probably a couple of months ago, yeah, 3 months ago, 4 months ago. It's been hard to keep track of time in Auckland, being in lockdown for so long. You forget what day it is. It's like being in Las Vegas. But they sort of, all of a sudden had this realization that their entire strategy was completely redundant. It had literally been, completely napalmed. So they had to start again. And we came up with this fantastic plan, actually, and that they thought was way better than what they had. And we're going through some of these processes, and something we'll see in the next week. We recrafted a plan that we would have never seen if it wasn't for this moment. And so they're now on the path to being a market leader. That's their intention, not just in New Zealand, but globally. That's the opportunity that's opened up as a result of the COVID environment. There's probably one just like that for you too. So the questions are important because they'll shape your brain to come up with far better answers getting into that template, get it focused, bring your team. Those who play in the fight, don't fight the plan. You want them to own the plan, own your company, own it. So great for team, great for culture.
Okay, it doesn't look like we have any specific questions, but thank you for your thanks, Nikki. That's much appreciated. We look forward to seeing you on November the 17th at Simon's webinar. If you have no more questions or comments for us, we're going to wish you all a very good day and wish you every success with your business and with your plans.